Good evening, my friend, and welcome back to our little corner of the Middle Ages, where the only thing stickier than the tavern tables are the stories themselves, and where, if this were a real medieval inn, you'd be paying for tonight's episode with a chicken, 3 onions, and a slightly suspicious jug of ale, instead of a simple click on a screen. I'm glad you're here, and before we step through the smoky door of tonight's tale, imagine a medieval tavern keeper leaning over the bar and shouting, "If thou likest this story, hit that, what dost thou call it, subscribe button, or I'll water thy ale." And with that very serious historical warning out of the way, if you enjoy these sleepy journeys into the past, it really does help if you gently tap like, subscribe to the channel, and most of all tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and what time it is for you right now, because I love scrolling through and seeing someone in Texas half asleep at 11:32 p.m., someone in London listening at 3 in the morning, and someone in the Philippines waking up with a medieval hangover they didn't actually earn, all of us sharing the same story across different places and different hours of the night, as if this were one huge tavern with candles burning in every time zone. So if you can, dim the lights around you, maybe let a fan or a heater hum softly in the background like distant tavern noise, settle your head into the pillow, close your eyes if you like, and let's walk together down a muddy medieval street towards a tavern door that probably smells worse than anything your nose has met in this century, but which, for people back then, was one of the warmest, liveliest and most comforting places they knew, a place of laughter and lying, of dice and stew, of music, flirting, arguments, and the kind of sleep that arrived only after too many mugs and not enough judgment. You can picture yourself there, wrapped in a rough woolen cloak that has soaked up more rain than you'd care to count, trudging carefully along a narrow lane where the mud grabs at your boots with every step, and where the smell is a thick, layered thing, horse manure and wood smoke, and something that might be soup or might be sewage. You are not entirely sure, and above you the sky is low and heavy, rain either still falling in thin stubborn lines, or having just stopped so that everything shines in a slick, treacherous way, from the cart tracks in the road to the one pair of shoes you own, already wet through and chilled, your toes cold and your stomach complaining quietly, like a disgruntled little peasant of its own. There are no glowing signs ahead of you, no neat wooden board that says Medieval Tavern, 5 stars on ye olde Yelp, no friendly arrow on a phone. There is only your hearing and your nose, and the simple rule that has always guided travellers in every age: when you are hungry, follow the noise, and as you move past the blacksmith's forge, where a last dull glow still pulses in the coals, and the air tastes of iron, and past the fishmonger stacking his baskets, and loudly insisting that his river eels are still fresh, even though they look as tired as you feel, you begin to catch that particular mixture of sounds that only means one thing: laughter rolling like waves, voices raised in argument and in song, the scrape of wooden benches on earth, and the strange, heroic attempt of someone who is very drunk and very determined to hit a high note they will never ever reach. You turn a corner, and there it is at last. Your destination for the night. A crooked wooden building leaning a little to one side like a man who has had far too much, its upper floor stretching out over the street, its timbers blackened by age and smoke, and hanging over the door, swinging a little in the damp wind, a sign with a crudely painted image on it, perhaps meant to be a barrel, or a bear, or a drunken artist's attempt at both at once. But it doesn't really matter, because what you need is not art criticism but warmth, and you know from the noise spilling out through the cracks and from the faint golden glow in the shutters that this is exactly the right place. The step in front of the door is slick with old ale and fresh mud, and when you reach out and push the heavy wooden door, its hinges groan in a long theatrical creak, as if the tavern itself is announcing your arrival to everyone inside. Immediately a wave of warm air hits your face, carrying with it a dense perfume of wood smoke, wet wool, sour beer, and something meaty and indefinable bubbling in a pot over the fire. and for a moment you stand in the doorway like a traveller stepping from one world into another, the dark, rainy street at your back and this low, smoky cave of light and sound before you. Inside, the ceiling is low enough that tall men instinctively duck, and drunk men forget and bump their heads to the amusement of everyone around them. The rafters overhead black with years of soot and decorated with the occasional hanging chunk of dried meat, a stray bundle of herbs, or a boot that no one has claimed in far too long. The floor is not polished wood but packed earth, scattered with straw, in a half-hearted attempt to soak up the spills and the spit, and the accidents of a busy evening, though really it only serves to hide what you probably don't want to see, and every step squelches or crunches faintly under your weight as you move carefully forward, one hand keeping your cloak close, the other guarding the small coin pouch at your belt, because a medieval tavern is warm, but it is not necessarily kind. There are no neat rows of private booths here, no quiet corner with a little lamp and soothing background music, only long rough tables and lopsided benches that have survived more elbows, fists and tankards than you could count, scattered around as if someone arranged the furniture in the middle of an earthquake, and then simply never bothered to fix it. The only real centre of the room is the hearth, a great open fire at one end, flames licking at blackened logs, smoke curling upwards, and then rather reluctantly finding its way out through a chimney that doesn't quite do its job, so that the whole room is softly hazed and your eyes prick just a little as they adjust. The tavern smell closes around you like another layer of clothing, thick and complicated. The top note the sharp sour tang of ale that has been spilled on every surface, soaked into the wood of tables and benches and even into the straw underfoot. Beneath it the salt warmth of sweat from bodies pressed close together, men and women who have worked all day in fields or workshops and have no intention of washing just for the pleasure of sharing your personal space. Under that again, a dampness of wet cloaks and boots steaming gently near the fire, a whisper of mould from old bread, a hint of boiled onions and meat that might be rabbit or pigeon or yesterday's stew returning for an encore, a smell so intense and familiar to the people here that they hardly notice it, while you, coming from a modern world of deodorant and ventilation, feel as though your nose has been thrown into the deep end without warning. Your eyes pick out details as you move further in, tables carved with initials and rude little drawings gouged in with knives by bored or boastful drinkers years before, deep scars running through the wood where quarrels have left their mark, benches that wobble and creak but stubbornly refuse to collapse, rough wooden cups and clay mugs scattered everywhere, some empty and forgotten, some still half full and jealously guarded, a one-eyed dog curled possessively around a bone under a table, as if he pays rent for that particular patch of floor, a man already passed out with his head resting in a wooden bowl, one hand still clutching a ladle like a defeated champion, and in a corner a pair of locals arguing loudly about something as small as the price of a chicken, and as large in their ale-soaked minds as the fate of the kingdom. It takes a little time, but eventually you spot a space you can claim, a gap on a bench near the hearth where the heat reaches your chilled hands and face, the wood slightly damp under your fingers from a recent spill that you do not examine too closely, and as you lower yourself to sit, you feel the whole bench shift under the weight of its occupants, everyone instinctively shuffling to accommodate the newcomer, the way a living organism adjusts to a new heartbeat. You're close enough to the fire now to watch as fat drips from some joint of meat, turning slowly on a spit, sizzling when it hits the embers, sending up brief, fragrant spurts of smoke that mix with everything else, and somewhere above the crackling and popping you can hear the uneven plucking of a lute, a bard in the corner, trying to coax a tune out of an instrument that has seen better days and better strings. At the centre of all this, like the eye of a slightly intoxicated storm, stands the tavern keeper, the unofficial ruler of this smoky kingdom, behind a sturdy plank of wood balanced on barrels that serves as a bar, their hands moving constantly from mug to jug to spilled mess, their voice rising above the general noise when they bark at a slow helper or a customer who has conveniently forgotten last week's bill, their eyes tracking the room in quick, sharp glances that miss very little. Because in a world where almost nothing is written down, this person's memory is the ledger, the security system, and the local news station, all in one. Regulars are greeted with a nod, strangers like you with a longer, measuring look, and troublemakers with the kind of stare that says a heavy club is never far from reach. You watch as they pour ale from a broad-bellied barrel into wooden mugs, the liquid cloudy and thick, little flecks of grain still floating in it, and you know that when you finally lift one to your lips later, it will be warm, not cold, bitter and surprisingly nourishing, safer to drink than the water in the town's wells, which might be carrying invisible dangers. Children back then sip weak ale every day not to grow tipsy, but because the brewing process, boiling and fermenting, quietly kills many of the things that would rather kill them. And as you sit there in the flickering light, feeling your modern mind slowly settle under the weight of old routine, you realize that this crowded, smoky space, so unhygienic by your standards, is in its own way a machine for keeping people alive through long, dark seasons. Voices rise and fall around you. Someone nearby laughs so loudly. It sounds almost like a bark. A farmer at your elbow thumps the table to emphasize a story about a cow that gave birth in such a ridiculous position that he now tells it every night he can find an audience. A soldier in battered armor by the fire regales a small crowd with a tale in which the number of enemies and the amount of glory both increase with every cup he drains, and his listeners know perfectly well that the details are embroidered yet lean in all the same, because the point isn't truth, it's escape. The bard in the corner stitches invented love and loss into the air, and every so often a burst of song catches the rhythm of the room so perfectly that the entire tavern seems to move and breathe in one great noisy exhale. Here at this rough, damp table, with the warmth on your face and the chill slowly leaving your hands, you can feel your own day unwinding behind you, the worries and lists and alerts of your modern world fading like the sound of the rain outside when the door closes, and as the fire crackles and the lanterns sway a little in the draught and the smell of stew and smoke and old wood wraps itself around you, this medieval tavern becomes not just a place of noise and chaos, but a kind of shelter, a place where for one night you are simply another tired traveller under a low roof, listening, breathing, and letting the slow, steady heartbeat of rowdy voices carry you gently towards sleep. And so you sit there, shoulders touching strangers who will never know your name, watching the tavern keeper glide and stomp and shout their way through the crowd, hearing dice clatter on a nearby table, seeing a barmaid thread her way gracefully through an impossible maze of elbows and mugs, all of it blurring into a soft, continuous murmur. And as your eyes grow heavier in the firelight and the world outside shrinks to the space between these walls, the night in the medieval tavern truly begins to unfold around you, one drink, one story, one sleepy breath at a time. And as you settle deeper onto that uneven wooden bench, feeling your body slowly thaw from the cold outside, the room around you begins to reveal its many layers the way only a medieval tavern can, through sound, smell, and the strange comfort of human chaos pressed tightly together beneath a thatched and smoky roof. And for a moment you simply sit and observe, letting your mind drift lazily the way a candle flame wavers in a soft breeze, slow and steady and warm. Your gaze travels across the dim, flickering room where shadows dance up the soot-blackened beams, and every corner seems to hold a small story of its own, as if the walls themselves have absorbed 1,000 nights just like this one, and are whispering them back in the crackles of the fire. A beggar asleep by the hearth shifts slightly in his slumber, pulling a thin wool blanket closer to his chin, and nearby a pair of dice players lean in so closely over their game that their foreheads almost touch, both of them muttering small pleas to Lady Luck as if she might be tucked inside one of the dented wooden cups on the table. Somewhere behind you a dog lets out a single weary sigh that sounds almost human in its resignation to the noise, and just beyond him a group of locals bursts into sudden laughter as a tankard tips and sends a splash of ale across the table. the man responsible shrugging with an embarrassed grin, while the others slap him on the back as though this small disaster were the highlight of their evening. The bard's lute gives out another squeaky note, but instead of giving up, he simply clears his throat, shifts his weight, and begins again with the same stubborn tune, determined to coax beauty out of an instrument that has clearly survived both battles and bad weather. Across the room, the tavern keeper moves like a force of nature, one moment wiping down a table with a rag that has seen far better years, the next moment pointing a thick finger at a pair of rowdy youths who instantly straighten their backs and pretend to behave, their earlier bravado evaporating under that single warning glance. A moment later, the keeper is laughing heartily with an old regular, slapping him on the shoulder and pouring him a mugful so generous it nearly spills over, proving that in this room power and kindness come from the same hands and are measured in equal parts ale and authority. The fire pops loudly, sending a brief spray of sparks up the chimney where most of them vanish, though a few drift back into the room before settling harmlessly onto the stone hearth, and that warm glow pulls your attention toward the pot hanging above it, a heavy iron cauldron bubbling steadily with tonight's pottage, the kind of thick, steaming stew that has kept travellers alive through countless winters. Each time the tavern keeper or their helper ladles some into a bowl, a new wave of scent rolls across the room. Grain, herbs, something that might once have been rabbit, and the simple promise of a hot meal makes your stomach tighten with longing. You shift slightly, feeling the straw under your boots crunch softly, and from the corner of your eye you watch as a merchant in a stained cloak argues good-naturedly with a soldier, the two of them half shouting over the noise about the correct way to sharpen a blade, or the outrageous price of wheat in the next town over. The soldier's armor is dented and his boots muddy, but he carries himself with the kind of swagger only a man who has survived a dozen close calls can muster, while the merchant keeps patting his coin pouch as if reminding himself and everyone else that even in a tavern wealth is just another form of armor. Next to them, a woman in a patched dress weaves through the crowd with practiced skill, balancing 3 mugs in one hand and a bowl in the other without spilling a drop. Her face brightened by the firelight and her smile quick and sharp when someone cracks a joke. A child darts past her legs, snatching a piece of bread from a table before disappearing like a tiny, well-trained thief, leaving only a trail of laughter behind as the diners reach instinctively for their purses, and then relax, knowing this sort of thing is simply part of tavern life, and rarely worth getting angry about. As the noise swells, a wave of voices rising, falling, blending into a single warm hum, you feel your eyelids grow heavier, lulled not just by the physical exhaustion of the long imaginary journey you've taken to arrive here, but by the strange comfort of being surrounded by people who are noisy but harmless, loud but friendly, chaotic but alive in a way that makes the world feel both bigger and smaller at the same time. And in this moment you understand why medieval travellers loved taverns so deeply, despite their dirt and their smell, and their constant threat of petty mischief, because within these smoky walls, under this low wooden roof, a tired soul could find warmth, food, company, and a temporary refuge from a world that was often far colder and far harsher than this rowdy sanctuary. Your breath's slow, and even now, you lean a little closer to the fire, listening to the faint crackling of the logs and the murmur of conversations swirling together, and you can almost feel the centuries between you and this tavern dissolving into nothing, leaving only the soft glow of firelight, the gentle comfort of shared humanity, and the unmistakable sense that no matter how old the story, the need for warmth, companionship, and a place to rest at the end of a long day has never truly changed. And as you sit there, wrapped in your cloak and surrounded by strangers, who for tonight share the same shelter and the same slow settling calm, the medieval tavern begins to draw you deeper still into its world. And as the warmth of the hearth settles into your bones and the steady, rhythmic hum of the tavern wraps around you like a wool blanket, softened by years of use, you begin to notice how this place breathes slowly, unevenly, but with a kind of life all its own, the kind that comes from dozens of people sharing the same fire, the same air, the same unspoken agreement that tonight, for a few fleeting hours, everyone here belongs to the same noisy, smoky little universe. Near the far wall, two men lean so close over a table that their noses nearly touch, their dice game now reaching a level of intensity that borders on religious, the bone cubes rattling across the weathered surface like tiny thunderclaps. One man mutters a prayer to a saint who probably has better things to do, while the other kisses his lucky charm, a smooth pebble he swears once saved him from lightning. And when the dice finally settle, the winner slams both fists onto the table, shouting triumphantly as a small crowd erupts in laughter and groans, half of them accusing him of cheating, and the other half wishing they'd placed a bet while they had the chance. A little closer to where you sit, a farmer with cheeks as red as ripe apples lifts his mug high, launching into yet another retelling of a story about the time a cow escaped its pen and somehow ended up inside the parish church. Whether or not this ever truly happened is irrelevant, because every listener leans in as though hearing a sacred tale, waiting for the moment when the cow slipped on the stone floor and sent the priest diving for safety. And when the farmer reaches that part, he slaps the table so hard that ale sloshes out of several nearby mugs, prompting everyone around him to break into hearty, appreciative laughter. Across the aisle, a hooded stranger sits half hidden in the shadows, his face barely visible beneath the deep fold of his cloak. Now and then he raises his mug slowly, his movements controlled and deliberate, as if he is trying not to be noticed, or perhaps trying not to notice something himself, and every so often his eyes flick briefly toward the tavern keeper, who watches him with the calm, steady attention of someone who has seen many such mysterious figures come and go, and knows exactly when to worry and when to simply keep pouring drinks. Closer to the hearth, the bard finally gets his lute to behave for a moment, the strings trembling into a soft, wandering melody that floats gently over the crowd. It's not perfect, a little scratchy and uneven, but something about the tune, simple, slow, shaped like an old memory, makes even the loudest tables quiet for a heartbeat. The kind of shared pause that feels almost tender in a room, otherwise ruled by shouting and spilled ale. And as the firelight flickers across tired faces, you sense the way stories and songs are not decorations here, but necessities, as essential as food and drink for people who carry more burdens than they ever admit. The barmaid who passed by earlier now returns with an empty tray tucked under one arm, the hem of her apron stained from a dozen close calls, her cheeks flushed from weaving through crowds like a dancer, avoiding clumsy partners. She calls out to someone near the bar, laughs when a man tries to flirt with her using a line he has clearly practiced too many times, and then expertly flips a fallen mug upright with the edge of her foot before moving on, as if balancing chaos were something she's turned into an art form. Right beside you, a pair of old friends compare scars you suspect they've both exaggerated over the years, pointing to faded marks on their arms and trading increasingly ridiculous tales about how each one was earned. A wolf attack that sounds more like a scared house cat, a battle that definitely didn't happen anywhere this side of the kingdom, and a fishing accident so dramatic it might as well have involved sea serpents. Yet when they laugh together, that deep, rolling kind of laughter that makes their shoulders shake, there's nothing false about it, and you can feel how genuinely glad they are to still be in each other's company after so many seasons of work and worry. The tavern keeper suddenly calls for quiet, not loudly, just firmly enough that a ripple moves across the room, voices lowering, mugs pausing mid-air, and then they lean across the bar to deliver a warning to a man who looks like he's had far too much. A simple message that if he doesn't sit down and behave, he'll be sleeping outside tonight with the goats instead of upstairs, with the rest of the paying guests. The man nods sheepishly, the room exhales, and with the danger past, the noise rises again as naturally as a breeze returning after a moment's stillness. You shift a little, warming your hands against the side of your mug, and as you breathe in the smoky air, filled with the scent of roasted fat and damp wool and faintly sour ale, you find a strange comfort in the imperfections of the place, the uneven floor, the cracked mugs, the the constant hum of arguments and laughter blending together like one long, never-ending story being told by dozens of voices at once. It is messy and loud and utterly human, and somehow it makes you feel more grounded than silence ever could. A pair of children scurry past your feet, one clutching a crust of bread triumphantly, the other giggling as she hides behind a barrel, watching the barmaid pretend not to notice them. Even the tavern dog, now awake, gives a half-hearted wag of his tail before settling beside the hearth again, clearly content to serve as both foot warmer and crumb collector for anyone who chooses to sit near him. The room swells with warmth and presence, every crackle of the hearth and every murmur of conversation blending into a soft, enveloping rhythm that makes your shoulders loosen and your breathing grow slower. And as you sit there taking in this noisy, crowded, wonderfully alive scene, you feel the boundaries of the modern world slipping away, the clocks, the screens, the endless lists, until there is nothing left but firelight, the scent of stew, the slow fading of tension, and the gentle certainty that this medieval tavern, for all its rough edges, is exactly the kind of place where a weary soul can finally rest. And as your eyes grow heavier, the world around you drifts into an even softer haze, and the night inside the tavern deepens. And as the minutes roll by in this warm, smoky refuge, you begin to sense the subtle shift that happens when a medieval tavern settles fully into its nighttime rhythm, when the chaos no longer feels chaotic at all, but instead becomes a kind of steady pulse, a living heartbeat of wood, fire, and weary people holding on to whatever small joys the evening offers them. The fire in the hearth burns brighter now, fed by a thick log someone placed carefully into the flames, its bark crackling as it catches, sending waves of heat into the room that make the nearest patrons stretch out their hands with quiet satisfaction, the glow deepening the lines on their faces and turning their eyes into small glints of gold. Shadows ripple up along the beams overhead, moving like lazy smoke spirits drifting in the rafters, and now and then a flicker of sparks drifts upward, disappearing long before reaching the darkly stained ceiling. The bard, who earlier struggled to coax anything pleasant out of his battered lute, finds a softer, gentler melody this time, one that floats through the room like warm breath on a winter morning. The tune is simple, only 4 or 5 notes repeated in small wandering patterns, but there is something soothing in its predictability, something calming in the way the notes sway back and forth like a lullaby meant not for children, but for tired adults carrying too many worries. You can't quite make out the words he hums under his breath, but you feel them all the same, something about long roads, small mercies, and strangers, sharing the same fire for one peaceful night. Across from you, a pair of older women share a quiet conversation, their voices low and rhythmic, the way people speak when the stories they tell have been spoken many times before. One gestures with a half-eaten piece of bread as she describes an illness that swept through her village last year, while the other nods slowly, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug. Their expressions are worn but gentle, softened by the comfort of companionship, and every so often they both laugh, short, breathy laughs that reveal a kind of resilience found only in people who have weathered many storms and learned to treasure the smallest comforts. In a far corner, a young man sits alone with his elbows on the table and his head bowed slightly over his mug, not in sadness but in contemplation. He spins the handle of the mug slowly between his fingers, watching the firelight ripple across its surface as if trying to read answers there. And once or twice he glances toward the door, as though waiting for someone who may or may not arrive. It is a quiet kind of longing, the kind that doesn't draw attention but fills the air around him like a pocket of still water in a river of noise. Near the bar, the tavern keeper begins stacking empty mugs and shaking their head at the growing mess of the evening. Yet, even in their grumbling, there is a sense of routine, a practiced familiarity that suggests they've watched hundreds of nights like this rise and fall, nights of spilled ale and small arguments, of songs half sung and stories half true, of strangers stumbling in from the cold and finding for a few hours a place where no one expects more from them than a shared laugh or a simple coin. The keeper wipes down the bar with a rag that's more memory than fabric at this point, and a faint smile tugs at the corner of their mouth when a regular raises a mug in their direction with a slurred, grateful cheer. A little boy in a patched tunic wanders from table to table, sweeping up stray crumbs and dropped bits of straw, occasionally rewarded with a coin or a pat on the head from someone who remembers what it felt like to be small and hungry in a world where children are often forgotten. He works with surprising focus, carefully avoiding boots and spilled drinks, and when he finally approaches the hearth, he rests for a moment beside the dog, placing a gentle hand on its fur, as if sharing a secret warmth just between the two of them. Then, quite suddenly, a hush falls over the nearest tables. Not silence, but a soft gathering of attention, as a traveller stands up near the centre of the room. He's wrapped in a cloak heavy with road dust and snow, the edges still damp from whatever storm he passed through earlier, and as he unfastens the clasp beneath his chin, the room seems to lean toward him with curiosity. His voice, when it comes, is calm and steady, the voice of someone who has seen enough of the world to understand the value of sharing a good story. He begins to speak, not loudly, but with the kind of presence that draws ears toward him like moths to a flame. He tells of a narrow mountain pass, of wolves whose eyes shone blue in the moonlight, of a village perched on a cliff where the wind spoke through the chimneys like an old, lonely spirit. The story is simple, meant to entertain more than impress, but something about the quiet confidence in his voice makes the room soften, makes the younger drinkers turn their mugs away from their lips for just a moment so they don't miss a word. The bard lowers his lute, listening. The barmaid pauses mid-step, her tray balanced effortlessly on her hip. Even the dog lifts its head, as if sensing the shift in atmosphere. And as the traveller continues, you feel yourself relaxing even further, letting the story settle over you like a warm blanket, your breath slowing, your shoulders easing, your eyelids growing heavier with each steady sentence he speaks. For this is how nights unfold in a medieval tavern, slowly, gently, like the pages of an old book turning on their own in the dim candlelight. And as the sounds blend together into one soft hum of fire and voices and distant laughter, you sink deeper into the moment, deeper into the warmth, deeper into the story. The tavern has fully settled into its nighttime heartbeat now, a slow and steady rhythm that moves through the room like the warmth of the hearth itself, rising and falling with each burst of laughter, each creak of a bench, each gentle clatter of mugs that have scraped across these tables for generations. The air is thick with smoke and comfort, layered with conversations that blend into a soft, continuous murmur, soothing in a way only crowded, lived-in places can be. The fire spits a bright ember that spirals upward before fading into the haze near the ceiling, casting shifting golds across faces that look softer now, less guarded, wrapped in that late-night tavern calm that arrives only after the hunger is eased, the drink is flowing, and the cold outside feels very far away. A group near the hearth leans closer together, sharing the warmth and passing a bowl of pottage between them, each taking a spoonful with the quiet understanding of people who've learned that comfort is easiest to share when life is hardest. Two young men, earlier loud with drink and bravado, now speak in low voices, their earlier swagger softened by the firelight. One of them traces the rim of his mug with a finger, confessing a fear about tomorrow's journey, while the other nods with a seriousness that wasn't there an hour ago, offering the kind of reassurance only close companions can give. Their words are swallowed by the room, but the tone, gentle, honest, steady, waves through the air like warmth from the hearth. Nearby, a group of women huddle around a battered table, trading stories between bursts of laughter. One slams her mug down as she describes a goat that chased her clear across a muddy yard. Another rolls her eyes dramatically when recounting a merchant who tried to flirt by comparing her to a sack of barley, and the rest laugh so hard they nearly tip their stools. They wipe tears from their cheeks, shoulders shaking, the kind of laughter that comes free and full only when the day is done and the worries have loosened their grip. Closer to the bar, the hooded stranger who sat quietly in the shadows earlier has shifted his position just enough to reveal the profile of a tired but sharp-eyed man. His cloak has dried in the heat, though mud still clings to its hem, and now and then he rubs at a scar along his jaw, lost in thoughts that no one else in the room is meant to hear. The tavern keeper notices him again, just a flick of the eyes, nothing more, but it's the kind of look that carries meaning, a silent acknowledgement, a reminder that in this place everyone is watched just enough to stay safe. A low chord hushes a small corner of the room as the bard begins to play again, this time choosing a tune that drifts like a tired sigh, slow and warm, with notes that rise gently before sinking back down, as if mimicking the breath of someone drifting towards sleep. His fingers move more confidently now, warmed by the fire and the few coins he earned earlier, and his voice hums softly beneath the melody, a quiet thread weaving through the louder noises of the tavern without demanding attention. Across the room, a merchant with a belly as round as the barrel behind him negotiates loudly with a wiry farmer, both gesturing dramatically over a bundle wrapped in cloth on the table. The farmer insists it's the finest wool this side of the kingdom. The merchant counters that it feels more like goat hair that lost its ambition. They go back and forth for several minutes before pausing at the exact same moment to sip their drinks, exchanging a look of mutual respect before diving back into the argument with renewed enthusiasm. Toward the center of the room, a trio of locals crowd around a splintered table, rolling dice with feverish intensity. The cubes clatter, bounce and spin before landing unevenly in the grooves worn deep into the wood. Groans and cheers erupt. A storm of excitement over stakes small enough to fit in a pocket, but large enough to stir tempers. One player accuses another of using a weighted die, and for a moment tension crackles. But the tavern keeper's stern glance from across the room is enough to dissolve the conflict into laughter. A little girl no older than 8 weaves through the chaos, with the ease of someone who has grown up among these tables. She carries a chipped mug nearly as big as her head, delivering it carefully to an old man who greets her with a toothless grin and a gentle ruffle of her hair. She darts away before he can finish thanking her, slipping back into the crowd like a tiny shadow with a purpose known only to herself. The tavern dog, a shaggy creature with one floppy ear and an expression of eternal patience, wanders from table to table collecting absent-minded pats and the occasional fallen morsel. He eventually curls up beside your boots, lets out a deep, weary huff, and settles his head on his paws, his slow breathing matching the rhythm of the fire and adding yet another layer to the tavern's sleepy soundtrack. A soft lull begins to spread through the room, not silence but a gentle easing, the natural winding down of a long evening. Conversations mellow, laughter softens, and even the arguments settle into quiet grumbles rather than fiery shouts. The fire burns lower, its embers glowing like sleepy eyes beneath the logs, and the air cools enough that a few people pull their cloaks tighter around their shoulders. The tavern feels heavier now, not tired, but peacefully weighted, as if centuries of stories have settled themselves into the walls for the night. The mood shifts from rowdy celebration to contented unwinding, and everyone, from the loudest dice player to the shyest traveller, seems to breathe a little slower, talk a little softer, and settle a little deeper into their seats. The warmth of the hearth, the low music, the murmur of voices, it all blends together into something close to a medieval lullaby, wrapping around you as the night deepens. The night grows thicker inside the tavern, the kind of deep, settling darkness that feels gentle rather than heavy, as though the walls themselves are exhaling after a long, chaotic evening. The candles burn lower, their flames shorter and softer now, casting halos of warm, trembling light across the tables, and turning every face into a quiet portrait of contentment, weariness, or the pleasant fog of too much ale. The last of the rain outside taps faintly against the shutters, but in here the world feels insulated, sealed by heat and human presence, a cosy pocket carved out of the cold medieval night. A pair of travellers at a corner table lean toward each other, sharing the kind of hushed conversation that only happens when the rest of the room has dimmed enough to feel private. One traces the rim of a clay cup as he talks about the long road behind him, about frozen streams and empty crossroads, while the other nods, pulling her cloak around her shoulders and listening with the soft patience of someone who understands the lonely rhythm of wandering from town to town. Their voices are barely more than a murmur, yet their companionship glows like an ember catching breath. Near the hearth, an elderly man who has been nursing the same mug all evening finally sets it aside, rubbing his hands together as the fire reflects in his eyes. He begins telling a story to no one in particular, his voice drifting out into the room like smoke, something about storms from decades past, when the snow came down so hard that roofs caved in and people had to dig tunnels from house to house. A few listeners gather around him, drawn by the tone of memory in his voice, and though his tale wanders, dipping into exaggeration and skipping details, it has the easy cadence of someone who has spent a lifetime spinning long nights into narrative. The tavern keeper stands at the bar with arms crossed, surveying the room with that blend of protectiveness and sternness that defines their role. They're tired, of course they are, but there is pride in the way they watch over their patrons, making sure tonight's peace stays intact. Now and then they straighten a mug, nudge a wobbling stool into place, or pick up a fallen scrap of straw with a gruff efficiency. When someone looks up to meet their gaze, the keeper offers a nod that says more than words ever could. You're safe here for the night. A soft gust of wind slips through the doorframe when someone enters briefly before heading upstairs to settle into the cramped sleeping room. The draft ripples through the tavern, making a few cloaks flutter and the flames quiver, and for a moment the smell of rain mingles with the scents already in the air: smoke, warm wool, stale beer, and the rich thickness of the stew that has been simmering for hours. It adds a strange freshness to the room, a small reminder of the cold darkness waiting outside, a darkness no one here is quite ready to face again just yet. At a nearby table, two men attempt to continue a card game despite being too drowsy to keep track of whose turn it is. Their cards slant in their hands, their eyes blink slowly, and every so often one of them forgets the rules entirely and has to be reminded with a laugh. Eventually they give up, set their cards aside, and simply sit with their shoulders touching, sharing the kind of silent companionship that forms after a long night spent in the same warm haven. The bard, now slumped comfortably against the wall with his lute resting across his knees, strums a few quiet notes, not a song, not quite, but more like a meandering thought made musical. His fingers glide absent-mindedly along the strings, while his eyes drift half-closed, his mind floating somewhere between wakefulness and sleep. Those random little notes blend into the tavern's nighttime tapestry perfectly, forming a gentle thread that ties every sound in the room together. A young woman who has been helping serve food all evening pauses to stretch her back, rolling her shoulders and breathing deeply as she leans against a pillar. She watches the room with a soft smile, her expression tender in the dim light. A child asleep on a bench catches her eye, a little boy curled up tightly using a folded cloak as a pillow, and she steps over to gently drape another blanket across him before returning quietly to her tasks. No one notices but acts like that shaped the spirit of the tavern more than the loudest songs or the wildest fights ever could. A man at the far end of the room, flushed with drink, begins humming a tune he barely remembers. It's uneven and off-key, but it carries the unmistakable tone of a lullaby, something old and comforting, perhaps sung to him when he was a child. The people nearby smile faintly, letting the sound settle into the background like a soft memory unfolding. Conversation now has a dreamy quality to it, slower, smoother, cushioned by the warmth and the late hour. The grand stories turn to small whispers, the boasts turn to gentle confessions. The laughter becomes softer, more spaced out, the kind that lingers in the air rather than bursting like firecrackers. Your seat feels warmer now, your body sinking comfortably into the contours of the old wooden bench. The dog beside the hearth shifts closer to your boots, resting his head across your feet with a heavy sigh that seems to vibrate through the floorboards. The glow of the fire begins to blur slightly at the edges as your eyes relax, its bright center dimming and softening the way flames do when you begin to drift. The tavern never fully quiets, but it transforms into something softer, something almost tender, a place where exhaustion finds shelter, where stories fade into drowsy murmurs, where the night tucks itself around the room like a thick cloak. Sleep begins to thread itself through the tapestry of the tavern, gathering gently around every corner, every table, every weary traveller. The hour grows late in a way you can feel more than see, as though time itself has begun to walk more slowly between the tables, brushing past cloaks and benches with a soft, deliberate touch. The tavern's glow no longer feels bright and busy but warm and deeply settled, like a lantern whose flame has lowered itself on purpose, choosing calm over chaos. The smoky haze hanging beneath the rafters thins slightly as the fire burns down, and the sounds of the room take on a muffled, velvety quality, each voice softened at the edges as drowsiness spreads from person to person like a gentle, invisible tide. A handful of patrons rise unsteadily from their seats, murmuring quiet goodnights as they make their way to the narrow staircase leading up to the sleeping room. Their boots thump softly against the wooden steps, each footfall slower than the last, and the faint creak of the boards blends perfectly with the soothing rhythm of the tavern's nighttime chorus. A man pauses halfway up the stairs to steady himself with a hand on the railing, giving a sheepish smile to no one in particular before continuing upward with the resigned patience of someone who has climbed that crooked staircase many times before. Downstairs, the few who remain awake drift into gentler conversations, the kind spoken with half-lowered voices and lazy gestures. A woman in a wool shawl sits near the hearth with a mug cupped in both hands, staring thoughtfully into the glowing embers, as though reading old memories hidden between the cracks of the burning wood. Her companion, a wiry man with grey streaks in his beard, leans back against the wall, humming a quiet tune that wavers like candlelight, his eyes half closed in contentment. The dog by the fire shifts again, curling himself into a tighter bundle as he nudges his nose under his tail for warmth. Each breath he releases rises in a small cloud of steam, fading quickly into the air. A child nearby, now fast asleep on his side across two stools pushed together, kicks lightly in his dream, his tiny hands clutching at the blanket draped over him earlier. Someone gently tucks the fabric closer around his shoulders before returning to their own seat with a faint yawn. At one of the long tables, the scattered remains of a dice game lie abandoned, bone cubes resting at odd angles, a small pile of coins left unclaimed, and a mug tipped onto its side, though thankfully empty. A lone player lingers there, gazing at the dice as if lost in thought. Eventually he gathers them into his palm with slow, deliberate movements and slips them back into his pouch, the soft clink of bone against leather, barely louder than a whisper. The tavern keeper moves quietly now, no longer barking orders or clapping mugs onto the bar, but gliding from table to table with the deliberate care of someone closing a familiar, beloved space. They push stray chairs closer to the wall, wipe down a particularly sticky corner of a bench, and gather the last abandoned bowls into a stack. When the bard stirs and attempts to rise with his lute in hand, the keeper rests a gentle, steadying hand on his shoulder, shaking their head with a soft smile that says, "Stay, rest." The bard sinks back into his seat gratefully, his eyelids already drooping once again. Even the shadows seem to move slower now. They stretch long across the walls, swaying lightly with the flicker of the fire but never jolting or leaping the way they did earlier in the night. The room holds a calm that feels almost sacred, a quiet pause in the usually relentless march of medieval life, a rare moment where warmth triumphs over cold, where community overtakes loneliness, and where the hardships of the world outside are kept at bay by nothing more than shared space and shared breath. Above the hearth, the cauldron has begun to settle, its bubbling softened into a gentle simmer. A few tendrils of steam rise lazily, carrying with them the fading scent of herbs, grains, and the last slivers of rabbit or root vegetables left in the pot. The mixture inside is little more than thickened broth now, but even that thin aroma feels comforting in the stillness of the hour. A man at the table nearest you leans forward onto his elbows, his head dipping lower and lower until it finally rests on his folded arms. His breathing deepens, slow and rhythmic, like waves heading toward a quiet shore. Another patron, slumped comfortably against a pillar, nods off mid-sentence, his mug resting safely in his lap, thanks only to sleepy luck. A small chorus of faint snores begins to rise at random intervals, blending seamlessly with the dying crackle of the fire and the distant rustle of the wind outside. Your own body mirrors the mood of the room, shoulders loosening, breath easing, heartbeats slowing to match the tavern's gentle, steady cadence. The bench beneath you feels softer now, the edges of the evening blurring like ink spreading across parchment. The warmth from the hearth reaches you in slow, comforting waves, wrapping around your tired limbs until they feel heavier, anchored in place by the simple promise of rest. The tavern, once loud and frenzied, has transformed into a sanctuary of weary souls, each drifting towards sleep in their own quiet corner. The glow of the embers deepens, dying down into a warm orange pool that pulses gently against the walls, painting everyone in soft, forgiving light. The night continues to settle deeper still, gathering itself softly around the room like a thick woolen cloak drawn over tired travelers, holding them gently in its embrace. The hush inside the tavern deepens, until it feels almost like a second layer of warmth, soft and protective, settling over every table and every weary body still lingering in the room. The air is thick with that unmistakable after-hours calm, the kind that arrives only when the world has finally exhaled, when laughter has softened into breath, and when every sound folds into a quiet harmony that carries the promise of rest. Candle flames sway more gently now, their light stretching long across the scarred wooden floor. Wax drips in slow, lazy trails down the sides of the candles, forming tiny pools that glisten like amber in the dim glow. One by one, the candles sputter and shrink, their flames shrinking to delicate points before rising again, as if fighting sleep just as stubbornly as the last patrons. A lone traveller seated near the back wall pulls his hood lower over his eyes and leans against the timber behind him, the wood creaking softly under his weight. His posture loosens with each passing moment, his shoulders sinking, his breath settling into a slow, steady rhythm. A thin line of steam rises from his half-finished mug, fading into the smoky air like a whisper dissolving into silence. Across from him, a woman finishes tying up her long dark hair with a ribbon frayed from years of use. She yawns behind her hand, glancing at the closed shutters as though counting how many hours of darkness remain. When she stands, her knees pop faintly, but she smiles, one of those small, tired smiles that come from simple gratitude for warmth and company. She tucks her wooden spoon into her belt, then begins clearing the table with slow, practiced movements, stacking bowls so they do not clatter and disturb the fragile peace. The bard, finally too tired to fight sleep, slides his lute carefully into a cloth sack and stretches his legs out before him. His eyes drift shut almost instantly, his head tipping slightly to one side in a position that looks uncomfortable but somehow suits him. A faint snore escapes him, blending with the occasional sleepy sniffle from the dog curled nearby. Even his breathing seems musical, a low rhythmic hum that matches the tavern's quiet heartbeat. A few feet away, the tavern keeper wipes down the bar with slow circles, each motion gentler than the last. Their voice, usually booming, commanding, capable of silencing the rowdiest brawl, has softened into a series of low murmurs as they speak to their helper about storing the leftover stew, banking the fire, and locking the door once the last guest has drifted off to bed. Their heavy boots sound softer now as they move across the floor, though the solid, reassuring weight behind each step remains the same. In a shadowed corner, a pair of friends sit shoulder to shoulder, too comfortable to move, too tired to talk. One of them sways slightly, his eyes blinking slow and heavy, while the other leans back and rests his head against the wall with a sigh that seems to come from somewhere deep within. Their mugs sit untouched between them, half-full reminders of conversations that faded naturally into silence. The dog beside the hearth lets out a long, contented groan as he shifts closer to the warmth. He sprawls lazily onto his side, paws stretching out in front of him, pressing against the uneven floorboards. His ears twitch every so often at distant sounds, a crackle from the fire, a muttered dream from a sleeping traveller, but otherwise he lies still, perfectly content to doze until morning. The fire has burned low now, its bright crackling replaced by the soft glow of orange embers pulsing quietly in the hearth. Each ember glows like a tiny, sleepy heartbeat, the last remnants of the tavern's earlier energy tucked safely under its ash blanket. A faint curl of smoke rises upward, moving so slowly it seems painted in the air, drifting toward the chimney, where the night swallows it gently. Your own breath deepens as the warmth around you continues to settle. The bench you sit on feels almost soft now, worn and shaped by decades of bodies finding rest in the same spot. Your muscles loosen one by one, letting go of tension you didn't even notice holding. The blurry, golden light wraps itself around your thoughts, smoothing sharp edges, quieting stray worries, inviting your mind to drift just a little further into the stillness. A soft rustle draws your gaze to the sleeping child on the stools. He shifts onto his other side, hugging the blanket closer, his small face relaxing into a peaceful smile only children can manage even in the loudest, roadiest places. Someone nearby, perhaps his mother, perhaps just a kind stranger, adjusts the edge of the blanket around him so no cold draft sneaks in. Even the wind outside seems to quiet now. The faint tapping against the shutters becomes slower, gentler, as though the storm itself is winding down for the night. The room breathes in unison, an entire tavern of tired souls finding shelter beneath the same roof, sharing warmth without words. The night draws itself closer still, folding softly over the tables, the sleeping figures, the embers, and the worn wooden beams above. A sense of calm, deep and ancient, fills every corner, making the tavern feel like a haven carved out of time itself, a place where exhaustion is eased, where stories rest until morning, where even the chaos of medieval life pauses for a few precious hours. The tavern sinks deeper into this gentle slumber, its glow settling like a soft blanket across the room. The stillness inside the tavern stretches out in a slow, comforting way, as though the very walls are settling into sleep alongside the people within them. A faint warmth lingers in the air, the last echoes of the fire radiating outward in soft waves that mingle with the steady breathing of those who have already surrendered to rest. The room feels smaller now, not cramped but snug, enclosed by shadows that have grown thick and velvety in the dimming light. A man sitting near the door finally gives in to his exhaustion. His head droops forward until his chin touches his chest, and after a small, startled jerk, he settles again, this time sinking so deeply into sleep that his mug tilts in his hand without spilling. His cloak has slipped halfway off his shoulder, but he doesn't notice, and no one disturbs him. Someone simply nudges the fabric back into place as they pass, a quiet gesture of care in the soft gloom. At a table nearby, 3 women who spent much of the evening laughing now sit in a gentle silence, each lost in her own thoughts. Their mugs stand empty before them, the last drops dried at the bottom, and their hands rest loosely on the table's edge. One traces circles on the wood with the tip of her finger, almost hypnotically, while another leans her cheek against her palm, eyelids fluttering. The third hums a soft, tuneless melody under her breath, a quiet thread of sound meant more for herself than for anyone listening. The dog, having claimed his place by the fire, has fully melted into the floorboards, sprawled comfortably on his side with his paws occasionally twitching in some drifting dream. His breath rises and falls in steady, peaceful waves, the soft huff of each exhale blending with the gentle crackle of the embers. For a moment his ear flicks at a faint noise, someone shifting on a bench perhaps, but he doesn't wake, he merely sighs, curls in a little tighter, and sinks deeper into sleep. 2 travellers sharing a bench let their shoulders touch. Whether accidentally or out of companionship it is hard to tell. One has drifted sideways until his head rests lightly against the other's arm, and though his friend glances down at him with a faint smile, he doesn't move away. Instead, he adjusts his position just enough to offer a more comfortable angle, then pulls his cloak over both their shoulders, creating a tiny island of warmth for them alone. The tavern keeper moves methodically through the last of the chores, their steps soft and deliberate. They lift a mug here, straighten a stool there, their hands practiced and sure even in the dimness. Eventually they return to the bar, lean one hand on the counter, and take in the room with a long, slow breath. Their face, so often stern, demanding, commanding, has softened into something gentler, touched by the quiet satisfaction of seeing a long night finally at peace. From the rafters comes the faintest creak, the natural settling of old wood cooling as the heat drifts upward. The beams have carried countless nights just like this one, their grain darkened by smoke, their edges worn smooth by time. Tonight, as the tavern sighs into silence, the rafters cradle the warmth below like sturdy arms holding a sleeping child, steady and unshaken. A barely perceptible draft slips through the cracks around the shuttered windows. It dances briefly along the floor, stirring a loose piece of straw before disappearing beneath a bench. But the cold cannot penetrate far, not with so many people breathing the same warm air, not with cloaks draped over chairs and bodies huddled near the hearth. The tavern glows with life even in near darkness, a quiet pulse that beats steadily against the winter night outside. The bard, half reclined in his corner, breathes evenly now. His lute rests against his chest like a loyal companion, and his hand occasionally twitches as though he's still playing a song in his dreams. His hat has slipped sideways, shadowing half his face, giving him the peaceful look of a man who has wandered far and finally found a moment's refuge. Your own eyes feel heavier with each passing moment. The bench beneath you seems to mold itself to your shape, as though countless travellers before you have softened the wood into a cradle meant for tired bones. The dim light, the faint murmurs, the earthy smell of straw and smoke, it all weaves together into a single soothing tapestry that invites you to breathe a little slower, sink a little deeper, and drift a little further towards sleep. The tavern's breath rises and falls around you, human, gentle, familiar. Somewhere a stool shifts quietly, wood scraping softly against earth. Someone lets out a faint sigh. The embers glow in a steady rhythm, each pulse illuminating the room with a warm, fleeting blush before falling back into shadow. The night settles completely now, wrapping itself around every corner and beam, every sleeping figure, and every quiet sound, as though the tavern has curled up too, tucking itself into the darkness with its people. It becomes a haven suspended gently between waking and dreaming, untouched by the storms outside, protected by warmth and old wood and soft human presence. A deep sense of calm fills the room, sinking into your chest like a slow, steady heartbeat, grounding you, easing you, preparing you for the quiet that follows. The tavern drifts into a deeper quiet, the kind that feels almost sacred, as if every sound must soften itself before entering the space. The last whispers fade into slow, wandering breaths, and the warm glow from the hearth settles low across the floor, like a thin blanket of amber light. What remains of the fire crackles only now and then, each spark rising gently before dissolving into the shadows hanging above. A man slumped over a table finally gives a small, weary snore, the sound soft and harmless, blending perfectly with the room's muted rhythm. No one stirs at it. It simply becomes another part of the tavern's nighttime breathing. His hand, loosely curled around the handle of his mug, twitches gently, as if reaching for a dream he isn't quite awake enough to grasp. A moment later, his shoulders relax even more, sinking him deeper into the kind of sleep only the truly exhausted can find. On the far side of the room, a young couple sits pressed together on a narrow bench, their foreheads nearly touching as they drift in and out of slumber. Their conversation has dwindled into soft hums, their fingers loosely intertwined above the table. Their cloaks spill onto the floor like pooled shadows, blending into the dim light. The woman's eyes flutter open for a second, unfocused and heavy, before closing again as she leans gently against her companion's shoulder. A lone candle on their table flickers, struggling against its final inch of wax. The flame leans sideways as though tired, its golden light trembling before steadying itself with a small, stubborn flare. The tiny pool of melted wax around its base glistens like honey in the dusk, reflecting the last shimmer of the flame before the room shifts subtly darker. The tavern keeper, who has wiped down more tables tonight than anyone has counted, rests for a brief moment on a sturdy stool behind the bar. Their shoulders drop, the strength in their posture softening, as they take a slow breath and allow themselves to simply listen. Their gaze drifts across the room, lingering for a heartbeat on each person asleep or close to it. Pride, fatigue, and a faint tenderness mix in their expression. This small kingdom of straw floors and smoky beams is quiet at last, and in the keeper's tired eyes, that quiet is its own kind of triumph. A cat, one you hadn't noticed earlier, pads softly along the beam above the bar. Its tail sways lazily behind it, as it surveys the sleeping humans with silent disinterest. When the cat reaches a warmer patch of wood above the hearth, it curls up, tail wrapped neatly around its paws, eyes narrowing into contented slits as it begins to doze. A faint purr rises from its small form, barely audible but adding another soft note to the tavern's nighttime lullaby. Near the center of the room, a half-finished bowl of pottage sits abandoned, steam long since vanished. A spoon rests in the bowl at an angle, as if someone intended to take one more bite but found sleep tugging too strongly to resist. The faint scent of herbs and cooked grain still lingers in the air, mixing with the smell of cooling embers and damp wool cloaks. Above the hearth, the iron cauldron creaks slightly as it settles from the day's heat. Each soft metal sound echoes gently in the quiet, like a sleepy sigh. The embers beneath it glow steadily, fading from bright orange to a deeper, more soothing red. Every so often, one ember brightens briefly, as though taking one last breath before sinking back into stillness. The wooden beams overhead groan lightly, as the night air shifts, an old familiar sound, as though the tavern itself is adjusting its weight, stretching its weary limbs after hours of holding warmth and noise. These creaks and murmurs are part of the building's personality, a reminder that even the structure rests when its people rest. Your own body responds to the gentle hush surrounding you. Your shoulders relax, your breath falls into the same unhurried rhythm, echoing around the room. The dim golden light washes over the edges of your thoughts, smoothing them down into something soft and quiet. The wooden bench beneath you feels warmer now, shaped by countless nights and countless travelers who, like you, sat here until the line between waking and dreaming grew thin. A faint rustle comes from the sleeping child nearby as he shifts in his makeshift bed of stools. The blanket slips a little, and almost instantly, the woman who tucked him in earlier rises from her seat to adjust it again, ensuring his small feet stay covered. Her movements are slow and quiet, careful not to disturb anyone. When she returns to her place, she pulls her own cloak tighter around her and tucks her knees up, clearly not far from sleep herself. The entire room breathes together now, a single soothing rhythm shared by strangers who have become, for one night, a temporary family under this wooden roof. The warmth, the fatigue, the softness of the hour, it all gathers into a peaceful hum, holding you gently in its center. The tavern feels like a world unto itself, drifting slowly toward complete stillness, wrapped in darkness, warmth, and rest. The tavern sinks even further into its gentle slumber, the quiet so deep and steady that every tiny sound seems to float in the air a moment longer before dissolving into the warm shadows. The embers in the hearth settle low, glowing like a row of sleepy eyes half hidden beneath a blanket of ash, their soft orange light casting slow, wavering shapes across the floor and walls. Those shapes sway and stretch, then settle again, like tired spirits settling down for the night. From the staircase leading to the sleeping quarters above, a single soft footstep sounds, someone shifting restlessly in an upstairs bed, or perhaps a late-arriving traveller finally climbing to their rented pallet of straw. The boards give a faint groan in response, the sound long and slow but not disruptive. It merely adds another delicate layer to the nighttime mix of breaths, murmurs, and the subtle settling noises of the old wooden tavern. Down below, at the long table nearest the bar, an older man who spent much of the evening telling stories now sits with his chin resting on his chest. His hands, rough and scarred from work, lay folded loosely in his lap. The mug beside him, once lifted with flourish as he recounted his adventures, now sits quietly abandoned. A faint whistle escapes his nose each time he exhales, a rhythmic, almost musical sound that blends soothingly with the crackle of dying embers. A cloak hanging near the door sways just a little as a breeze slips through the frame. The movement is soft, barely noticeable, but the edges of the fabric flutter gently, brushing against the wooden pegs on the wall. That subtle rustle makes the suspended shadows dance briefly before they settle into stillness again. Even the breeze seems gentler now, as though unwilling to disturb those sleeping beneath this roof. Close to the hearth, a woman who had been dozing upright finally lets her weight slide sideways until her head rests on the shoulder of the friend beside her. Her companion responds instinctively, adjusting their arm to support her more comfortably. The two of them sink into a shared quiet, their breaths slow and steady, blending into the peaceful atmosphere. Their faces glow faintly in the ember light, softened by fatigue and the warm comfort of closeness. The tavern keeper, now finishing the last of the nightly tasks, sets a heavy iron key on the bar with a soft clink. They sweep a few final crumbs from the counter with slow, almost hypnotic motions, the rag gliding gently across the wood. When the task is done, they straighten, stretch their back with a quiet sigh, and rest one hand on the bar as they look out over the sleeping room. For a few heartbeats, they simply stand there, letting the serene quiet wash over them, the reward for a day of endless noise and effort. They blow out the last candle on the bar. The flame shrinks, dims, and disappears with a thin wisp of smoke that curls upward and vanishes into the dark. Without that small light, the tavern fades into an even deeper coat of soft shadows. Only the glow of the embers remains now, pooling in a warm circle across the floor, illuminating just enough to show outlines: a slumped shoulder, a bowed head, a pair of boots abandoned beneath a bench. A soft thud comes from the far corner, a boot falling from a traveller's sleeping lap, or a hand sliding off a table in a sudden dream-induced twitch. But no one wakes. The room absorbs the sound like a sponge, pulling it gently into the tapestry of night noises woven through the space. The cat perched above the hearth stretches lazily, its back arching in a silent curve before it collapses again into a curled ball of fur. It tucks its face beneath its tail, ears folded delicately, its breathing so light and soft that it might as well be drifting on the warmth rising from the embers below. Your own body follows the room's lead. Your limbs grow heavier, your breath deeper, your thoughts slower and softer. The edge of the bench beneath you feels smooth and familiar, moulded by thousands of nights exactly like this one, where travellers, peasants, merchants, soldiers, even bards and thieves have given in to the same irresistible pull of rest after a long day. The faintest scent of sweet wood smoke lingers in the air, mingling with the grassy smell of straw and the warm musk of wool. These smells wind themselves around your senses, gently, soothingly, inviting you further into the calm. Somewhere across the room, a mug shifts slightly on its side as the wood beneath it contracts in the cooling air. The sound is barely a tap, barely more than a heartbeat, yet it ripples softly in the stillness, a reminder that even when every person in the tavern has fallen asleep, the building itself remains alive in its own quiet way. Shadows deepen, breath slow. Warmth settles like a blanket across every worn table and curled-up figure. The tavern reaches the quietest moment of the night, a moment suspended delicately between the end of one day and the beginning of the next. wrapped in the steady pulse of safe shared slumber. The quiet reaches a depth so complete that it feels almost like a soft vibration in the air, a shared stillness that blankets the entire room in a gentle, velvety calm. The tavern, once alive with shouts and clattering mugs, has become something close to a cradle, wooden beams curved like protective arms, straw-softened floor warmed by the last glow of the hearth, and a dozen sleeping figures breathing in slow, peaceful unison. The embers have dimmed to a deep, rich red, glowing like distant stars half hidden behind a haze of ash. Every now and then one flickers, pulsing with a fading warmth that spills across the stones in front of the hearth. The fire no longer crackles, it murmurs, releasing only the faintest sighs of settling wood. The light it casts is warm and low, turning every curve of furniture and every fold of fabric into soft silhouettes. At one of the side tables, a mug slowly tilts as the wood beneath shifts with the coolness of the night. It rolls just a fraction, then stops, the dull thump barely audible. Still, the sound drifts calmly across the room, a reminder that even in rest this old building gently shifts and breathes. A woman sleeping near the hearth draws her cloak tighter around herself, the movement small and instinctive. Her fingers curl softly at the edge of the fabric before relaxing again. Her breathing deepens, and for a moment her face softens into that unguarded expression only found in deep sleep. Peaceful, unworried, lightened of the burdens she carried through the day. Farther back in the room, the travelling merchant who had argued earlier about wool prices begins to lean sideways until his shoulder touches the wall. His head tilts, chin tucking against his chest, and he releases a long, gentle exhale. His hat slides down over his brow, hiding his eyes completely. The rhythmic rise and fall of his breaths make his cloak shift slightly with each inhale, a slow, steady motion that matches the rest of the slumbering tavern. The cat above the hearth stirs again, just a little. It uncurls long enough to stretch its front paws out, claws flexing lazily, before it tucks itself back into a compact ball. Its tail twitches once in dream or comfort and settles again. The faint purr returns, so soft it blends into the warm hush of the room, until it becomes simply another vibration in the stillness. Beside a pillar, two peasants who fell asleep mid-conversation now rest with their heads touching, their cloaks pulled together around them. One snores softly, the other breathes through parted lips, the combination forming a strange but soothing pattern that rises and falls like gentle waves. Their mugs sit forgotten on the floor, tilted but upright, catching the last faint flickers of emberlight on their rim. The tavern keeper, now seated behind the bar, lets their eyes drift half shut. Their posture, once rigid and alert, has eased, shoulders slumping slightly as they allow themselves a few precious moments of rest. The key still lies beside their hand, its metal dulled in the low light. The keeper's head nods once, then twice, and finally settles forward as sleep claims them too. Even in slumber, their presence feels solid, reassuring, a quiet guardian watching over the room. A soft creak echoes through the rafters as the night air cools the beams overhead. The sound floats downward like a sigh from the building itself. Dust motes drift lazily in the air, barely visible in the dim glow. The smell of smoke and warm wood lingers, mixing with the faint scent of dried herbs hanging in bundles on the walls. Your own breath matches the rhythm of the tavern's calm. It slows without effort, deepening gradually as your body relaxes into the quiet. The edges of wakefulness soften, thoughts dissolving into shapes and colors, heavy and slow, warmed by the atmosphere around you. Somewhere not far away, a gentle rustle sounds, perhaps a cloak shifting, or someone turning slightly in their sleep. The sound barely stirs the air, dissolving as soon as it appears, and then all is still again. The tavern seems to cradle everyone within, holding the warmth of bodies and the fading glow of the fire, guarding the soft breathing of weary souls who, for this one night, share the same shelter and the same peace. Outside, the cold night presses silently against the shuttered windows, but inside everything is safe, warm, and deeply calm. The room settles further, breath by breath, ember by ember, sinking into the quietest moments of the night, when nothing moves except the soft fall of sleep, embracing each corner and every heart. The deep quiet of the tavern settles into something even softer now, a stillness so complete that it feels almost like a gentle hand has drawn a warm blanket over the entire room. Every sound has grown distant and slow, as though wrapped in wool, the faint pulse of the embers, the soft breaths of the sleepers, the occasional shifting of wood as the old beams adjust to the cooling night. Nothing intrudes, nothing startles, everything drifts. A small puff of ash drifts upward from the hearth, fluttering in the warm air before dissolving into the dimness above. The embers glow with the steady pulse of a heartbeat, each soft expansion of light fading gradually into shadow. Their glow spills across the nearest stones, painting them in a deep, soothing orange that flickers but never flares. That steady rhythm seems to hum quietly through the room, guiding every breath, every eyelid, every thought toward rest. A man sleeping at a corner table murmurs something unintelligible in his dreams, a soft, low sound that fades as soon as it's born. His fingers twitch once where they rest on the wood, tracing an invisible line before falling still again. The cloak draped over his shoulders rises and falls gently with each breath, settling softly around him like a cocoon. Across from him, a woman shifts her weight just slightly, tucking her knees closer to her chest as she curls more deeply into her seat. Her hair spills across her face in a tumble of soft shadows that catch the ember light, glinting faintly before returning to darkness. Her breaths come slow and steady, each one carrying a quiet sigh of comfort, as though the very air she inhales is warm and safe. The travellers sharing a bench near the middle of the room drift even closer together. One slides down until his back rests fully against the wall, eyes closed, chin drawn gently toward his chest. The other lets his hand fall, knuckles brushing softly against the table's edge as he slips deeper into sleep. Their cloaks have mingled into a single dark shape, rising and falling with a rhythm so steady it seems to blend with the room's own breathing. Above the bar, the cat's tail curls tighter, each breath causing the fur to lift and fall in a tiny rhythmic wave. The creature's ears twitch faintly, responding to a dream only it knows, but it remains deeply at peace, purring so softly the sound barely ripples the air. Its small body, tucked neatly into the warm hollow above the hearth, seems to sink further into contentment with every passing moment. Near the door, the last lantern burns with a faint golden halo, its flame trembling just a little as a thin night draught whispers along the floorboards. But even that movement feels gentle, as though the wind itself understands the need for quiet. The lantern's light dances along the edges of nearby mugs, catching the rim of a tin cup before sliding away into darkness again. Under one of the long tables, the tavern dog stretches out with a slow, sleepy motion, his paws pushing slightly against the floor. He rolls onto his side with a heavy exhale, the kind that sends a wave of warmth drifting lazily into the cool air. His eyes flutter open for only a heartbeat, enough to take in the calm, the stillness, the sense of safety, before closing again with the trust of a creature who knows he is sheltered here. The tavern keeper, now fully surrendered to exhaustion, sits slumped behind the bar with their arms folded loosely, chin resting against their chest. Their breath, slow and even, blends into the soft tapestry of sound filling the room. Behind them, shelves lined with jugs and flasks seem to stand in quiet solidarity, their simple shapes softened by shadow. A faint creak stirs high among the rafters as the night leans deeper into its quietest hour. The beams hold firm, their ancient strength wrapped in the scent of smoke, warm wood, and old stories. They stretch slightly, releasing a slow sigh of settling timber, comforting, familiar, part of the tavern's nightly lullaby. Your own breath deepens again, without effort. The warmth lingering from the fire touches you gently, like the last glow of sunset resting on your skin. The wooden bench beneath you feels smoother, softer, moulded by 1,000 nights of weary travellers letting themselves drift. Thoughts grow quieter. Edges blur. The night smooths everything into something calm and safe. Every heartbeat in the room moves in quiet synchrony now. Different rhythms, different stories, all settling into the same peaceful tide of rest. No urgency remains, no noise intrudes, no world exists beyond these thick wooden walls and their soft embrace. The tavern, warm and worn and filled with sleeping souls, sinks even deeper into the stillness of night, holding everyone, humans, animals, dreams, gently in its quiet, glowing center. The stillness folds even tighter around the tavern, turning the room into a cocoon of warmth and muted breath, as if time itself has slowed to a drowsy crawl. The faint glow of the embers pulses softly in the hearth, their light no longer strong enough to dance across the room, but steady enough to cast a warm blush of colour over the nearest stones and the edges of a few wooden tables. That gentle heartbeat of light becomes the room's quiet centre, the last living spark of the day holding vigil over everyone who sleeps. A draught slips once more beneath the door, weaving a cool ribbon of air across the floorboards. It glides silently between boots and benches, stirring a loose strand of straw before dissolving into the tavern's warmth, without ever waking a single soul. The breeze is delicate, a reminder of the cold night outside, but inside, the air remains thick with the tender scent of smoke, simmered herbs, wool, and worn wood. A man leaning against a pillar exhales deeply in his sleep, his breath catching for a moment as he shifts to a more comfortable angle. His hand slides from his lap onto the bench beside him, fingers uncurling slowly until they rest loosely against the wood. His body relaxes further, the tension of the day melting away with every quiet breath he takes. The last candle, nearly spent, gives a tiny sputter. Its flame lifts briefly, as if mustering one final moment of brightness, then settles again into a small, steady glow. Wax drips down in lazy trails, forming soft ridges along its base before cooling into pale, hardened folds. Its warmth flickers across the metal rim of a nearby lantern, creating a faint shimmer that fades in and out like the slow blinking of a tired eye. Near the center of the room, two villagers who fell asleep mid-discussion now lie half-slumped against each other, their faces peaceful, their boots crossed loosely at the ankles. The soft murmur of their snores weaves together into a gentle duet, one low and steady, the other higher and faintly whistling, resulting in a strangely soothing harmony that seems to deepen the room's quiet instead of breaking it. The woman curled at the end of the long table pulls her cloak higher around her cheeks as her breathing grows deeper and more even. Her hair spills out across the table in a dark wave, catching the glow of the embers as though painted with faint strokes of gold. Her chest rises and falls in soft, even movements, completely untroubled by the world beyond these walls. The tavern dog shifts again, adjusting his paws as he rolls onto his other side. His tail thumps once, just a tiny tap against the wooden floor, then becomes still again. He stretches his back legs with a slow, contented motion, his claws clicking lightly against the boards before he tucks himself back into an even tighter curl. His breathing is heavy and steady, a warming presence that reassures anyone nearby, even in sleep. From the rafters, the cat shifts as well, adjusting its position so its head rests on its front paws. Its whiskers twitch delicately as it slips deeper into its dreaming, the faintest little purr vibrating through the wood below. The soft rise of its small body matches the slow, serene rhythm of the tavern, silent, restful, unbroken. A faraway sound echoes faintly, a drip of melting snow from the eaves outside, or perhaps a distant horse stamping its hoof in the stable. But the noise barely registers within the room, softened immediately by the heavy hush that fills every corner. It becomes part of the tapestry of night, blending with the creaks of cooling beams and the steady breaths of sleeping people. The tavern keeper's chin rests against their chest now, their arms folded loosely, their posture fully surrendered to sleep. A lock of hair slips across their forehead, swaying slightly with each breath, Their face, often stern and sharp during the rush of evening work, is softened now by exhaustion and the rare peace of a quiet, trouble-free night. A piece of straw glows faintly where it rests near the hearth, catching the last glimmer of ember light before fading into shadow again. Even these small details, tiny flecks of light, gentle breaths, the subtle shifting of blankets, build together into a scene of extraordinary calm. You feel the warm hush settle around your own shoulders, sinking into your thoughts, telling your body to release whatever tension remains. The world outside seems impossibly far away, cold, dark, forgotten. In here, nothing presses, nothing pulls. Every sound and movement is gentle, slow, like a lullaby woven from the simple comfort of being sheltered among others. The tavern breathes with you. The embers glow for you. The quiet wraps around you. The night sinks deeper still, soothing and complete, as the tavern holds its final waking moments before surrendering fully to rest. The tavern drifts into a silence so complete that it feels almost like a soft mist, gently filling the room and settling over each sleeping figure with a calming, weightless touch. The warmth from the hearth remains steady and low, its fading glow painting faint reddish halos on the nearby stones and softly illuminating the shapes of mugs, boots, and cloaks scattered across the floor. The last breaths of the fire whisper through the air like tiny sighs, each one softer than the last. Along the far wall, a man who had fallen asleep with his arms folded across his chest shifts ever so slightly. His shoulders rise with a slow inhale, then fall again in a heavy, peaceful exhale. The movement causes a small puff of dust to lift from the edge of the bench, swirling lazily before disappearing into the dimness. The man's brow smooths as he sinks deeper into rest, his chin dipping forward until it nearly touches the collar of his worn tunic. The woman curled beside the pillar tightens her blanket around herself, though her eyes never open. She nestles her cheek more firmly into the crook of her arm, her breathing soft and warm, her expression serene. Her cloak, frayed at the edges, lies pooled around her like a nest of soft shadows. A stray wisp of hair drifts across her cheek, before settling gently against her skin. The embers continue their quiet glow, their light flickering just enough to cast small, shifting reflections on the undersides of the tables. These tiny reflections move like sleepy fireflies, brightening ever so slightly with each subtle breath of warmth from the hearth, then fading again into the murk. Occasionally one ember gives a final spark, sending a thin, curling ribbon of smoke upward before sinking back into stillness. Near the door, a man's hat, knocked loose earlier in the night, lies tipped on its side. The faintest breath of cool air moves through the room, causing the brim to flutter in a slow, barely perceptible tremble. The breeze carries with it the scent of distant rain and cold soil, but it is too gentle to disturb anyone sleeping within. Instead, it simply passes through, soft as a sigh before fading quietly into the tavern's warmth. The young boy sleeping on his arrangement of stools shifts in his dreams. His small foot kicks once, the blanket ripples, and his hand rises instinctively, as though reaching for something in the air. But he settles again quickly, pulling the blanket close to his chin. The soft murmur of a dream leaves his lips, just a faint sound barely there before dissolving into silence. At one of the middle tables, two friends sleep shoulder to shoulder, their heads tipped forward in perfect symmetry. One of them lets out a faint snort that quickly fades into a soft rumble of snoring. The other responds unconsciously with a small twitch of his hand as though turning a page in some half-remembered dream. Their mugs sit side by side on the table, empty but still faintly smelling of warm ale. The cat perched on the beam above the hearth shifts, stretching its back legs in a slow, luxurious motion. Its claws flex gently against the wood, scraping in a soft, tiny sound. Then it curls again, wrapping its tail over its nose. The low purr starts up once more, vibrating faintly through the beam. The sound barely carries, but it adds a warm, contented thread to the quiet tapestry of the room. The tavern keeper's slow, steady breathing creates a soft rise and fall in their broad chest as they sleep. One hand rests near a wooden mug, the other draped over the edge of the bar. Their face looks peaceful now, freed of the stern lines carved there during long hours of work and noise. In the gentle ember glow they almost seem younger, softened by the rich shadows that cuddle close against their skin. The dog under the table releases a final heavy sigh before sinking fully into sleep. His ears twitch once, then his entire body becomes still except for the slow movement of his breathing. His fur glows faintly in the ember light, its edges blending into the floor's darkened texture. He looks as comfortable as if he were lying before a warm hearth in a grand hall, not on the worn boards of a lively tavern that has finally found its peace. Outside, the night presses against the walls, quiet and deep, but unable to enter the sanctuary within. The thick wooden beams hold strong, and the shuttered windows keep the world at bay. The tavern remains its own small island, floating gently in a sea of darkness, anchored by warmth, breath, and the soft hum of shared rest. Your own heartbeat slows to match the room's tranquil rhythm. The edges of your thoughts melt into the glow. The faint scents, the low breaths, the steady warmth, all of it draws you deeper into the soft center of this nighttime quiet. Everything in the tavern, the people, the animals, the very timbers, has settled into a perfect suspended calm as the night stretches into its gentlest, most silent hours. The quiet grows so deep and steady now that it feels almost like a soft tide flowing gently across the tavern floor, carrying with it the day's last remnants of warmth, and leaving behind only calm, slow-moving peace. The air has thickened into a kind of cozy stillness, warm, drowsy, familiar, like the gentle hush that settles over a forest just before dawn. Nothing stirs unless it has to. Nothing breaks the silence unless the silence is sturdy enough to hold it. A soft creak rises from one of the old beams overhead, stretching in the darkness like a sleepy limb adjusting itself before drifting back into stillness. Dust motes shimmer faintly in the ember light. Each time the wood shifts, turning the air into a quiet galaxy of tiny floating stars before they settle again into the peaceful gloom. At a table near the middle of the room, a man lies folded over his arms, face hidden in the crook of his elbow. His breath drifts out in calm, measured waves, each exhale stirring a faint ripple in his cloak. A stray curl of hair falls across his forehead, swaying gently as he breathes. The candle stump on the table beside him has finally gone out completely, leaving a thin wisp of smoke rising in a slow spiral before fading into darkness. A woman sleeping nearby adjusts her shoulders, her cloak slipping slightly but still cocooning her in its warmth. One of her hands rests loosely against the table's edge, fingers relaxed, her knuckles illuminated by a dim reddish gleam from the hearth. Her face, softened by sleep, carries a rare expression of unguarded rest. No worry, no strain, only calm. The embers glow in their stone cradle with a rhythm that feels almost alive. Their light pulses slowly, expanding with soft orange breath before drawing inward again, leaving the room in a gentle dark lull. Every pulse of light brings a delicate shimmer across the floor, highlighting the scattered pieces of straw and the rounded edges of boots tucked beneath benches. Near the bar, two villagers sit slumped against one another, their faces turned slightly toward the warmth of the dying fire. Their breaths are deep and steady, matching one another as though their bodies have unconsciously synced in the tenor of deep sleep. The mugs in front of them cast long, still shadows on the wood, untouched since the moment exhaustion overcame conversation. The tavern keeper breathes more deeply now, their head tipped forward, chin resting lightly on their chest. Their hands, folded near the key on the bar, twitch slightly in a dream before becoming still again. Their presence, even in sleep, feels protective, a silent sentinel resting but still rooted in the center of the room's peace. From the upper loft comes a faint shuffle, someone turning over on a straw mattress, shifting quietly, settling again. The sound drifts down the staircase like a gentle whisper, blending seamlessly with the murmured breaths below. A moment later, everything is still once more. Under a nearby table, the dog stretches out longer, pressing his paws soundlessly against the floor. His tail twitches once against the wood before he draws it back around himself. His breathing deepens, warm and steady, the kind of deep canine slumber that fills the room with a comforting sense of guardianship. His ear flops slightly with each breath, rising and falling like a tiny, loyal flag. Above, the cat adjusts its sleep with a subtle arch of its back, its tail curling more firmly around its small body. The faintest vibration of purring hums through the beam beneath it, barely audible but soothing, an almost invisible thread of comfort weaving through the tavern's stillness. The soft glow of the embers reflects off the metal rims of mugs, the edges of buckles and the faint sheen of wool cloaks. Everything seems wrapped in a muted warmth, edges softened into rounded shapes as the darkness settles deeper. There are no sharp sounds, no sudden movements, only the slow drift of breath, the warmth of bodies at rest, and the final whispers of a long day fading into dream. A loose shutter makes a gentle wooden tap against the wall as a whisper of wind slides past. The sound is mellow and slow, absorbed instantly by the thick, insulating calm inside the tavern. The cold outside feels distant now, unable to intrude through the layers of sleep and slumbering breath pooling in every corner. Your heartbeat moves in time with the room, slow and serene. Your breath lengthens, drawing in the faint scent of ash, warm wood, and worn wool. Your thoughts spread out gently, like ink flowing softly into warm water, until they fade into the quiet warmth around you. The tavern holds everyone in a suspended moment of perfect rest, timeless, soft, untouched by worry or noise. The night deepens further, rich and velvety, closing around the room with the gentlest touch, while the last ember glow pulses like a steady, sleepy heartbeat in the quiet center of the world. The silence inside the tavern deepens into something almost dreamlike now, a warm, velvety quiet that seems to fill every space between the beams and settle into the very grain of the wood. The air feels still but comforting, heavy with warmth and gentle breath, as though the entire room has exhaled and now rests in a perfect, unbroken calm. Nothing moves quickly, nothing disturbs. Every sound arrives softly, lingers gently, and fades like mist. A faint shift comes from someone asleep near the window, a quiet rustle of fabric as they draw their cloak closer around their shoulders. Their boots slide slightly on the floor, the movement so small and soft that it barely stirs the air. Their head settles again against the wall, eyes never opening, breath slow and deep, drifting deeper into dreams. The embers glow lower still, dimming into a dusky red that flickers only now and then, their light so soft that it barely touches the corners of the room. The fire no longer crackles, instead it hums with a slow, steady warmth. Each ember looks like a tiny jewel set into the dark, releasing thin ribbons of heat that ripple upward before disappearing into shadow. At one table, a sleeping traveller shifts his weight just enough for his cloak to slip a little. The fabric slides silently along the bench, trailing into the faint glow of the hearth before coming to rest. His fingers twitch, perhaps reaching for something in a dream, then fall still again. The expression on his face softens as he sinks even deeper into the warm safety of the tavern. The woman near the pillar bends one knee slightly, curling into herself as though tucking into a deeper pocket of warmth. Her breath comes slow and even, her lashes resting softly on her cheeks. The dim red glow from the hearth washes gently over her face, tracing faint highlights over her skin before retreating into the folds of her cloak. The tavern keeper's breath steadies, falling into long, peaceful intervals. Their posture, slumped yet steady, holds a quiet authority even in sleep. A strand of hair loosens from its tie and falls across their forehead, swaying ever so faintly with each breath. The key on the bar glints faintly in the emberlight, before sinking back into dimness. A mug somewhere in the middle of the room gives a soft, hollow tap as the wood beneath shifts subtly with the cooling night air. It doesn't roll or fall, just touches the table with the faintest sound, then rests again. The noise ripples across the room like a tiny pebble dropped into a still pond, but nothing stirs. The quiet absorbs it instantly. The dog sleeping under the bench sighs deeply, his paws twitching as though he's running in some peaceful dream. His ears flick once, then settle again. The warmth of his body radiates faintly into the floor, a comforting heat that spreads just a little into the nearby shadows. Above, the cat uncurls, stretches its back in one slow curve, and lies down again with its tail curled over its nose. A faint purr vibrates from its small form, a tiny, soothing rumble that melds seamlessly with the hush of the room. Its ears flick lazily as if listening to dreams drifting through the quiet. A traveller upstairs shifts on a creaky floorboard. The sound drifts down the staircase, muted and slow, like a distant memory rather than a present noise. A moment later, the quiet returns to its soft, steady fullness. Straw on the floor reflects the ember glow in pale gold threads, each little piece catching the light for a moment before blending back into dimness. The air holds the scent of cooled stew, warm wood, faint herbs, and the lingering smoke from the hearth, a comforting mosaic of smells that settle around the sleepers like another layer of blankets. Your own breath joins the slow rhythm of the room. Your lungs draw in the warm, earthy scent, releasing it just as gently. Your thoughts drift, softened by the heavy quiet, dissolving into the peaceful hum of sleeping bodies and fading firelight. The night reaches its deepest, softest point, a sweet, suspended moment where nothing exists beyond warmth, breath, and gentle darkness. The tavern, worn and loved and filled with the soft pulse of life at rest, holds everyone safely within its wooden embrace, drifting deeper into the quiet heart of night. The quiet inside the tavern becomes so complete, so tenderly settled, that it feels as though even time has curled up somewhere in a warm corner, choosing to rest for a while instead of marching forward. The air has a soft heaviness to it, a comforting drowsy weight that seems to settle gently over every cloak, every wooden beam, every slow and steady breath. The embers in the hearth glow faintly, no longer shining outward but pulsing inward, like the last warmth of a candle cupped carefully between hands. Their soft reddish light flickers, just enough to reveal the nearest shapes, boots tucked under benches, mugs resting on their sides, a cloak dropped on the floor like an abandoned shadow. With each slow rise of ember glow, the room warms just slightly. With each gentle fall, the darkness grows deeper, softer. A man sleeping with his head against the table sighs, a long, slow exhale that almost sinks into the wood beneath him. His breath stirs a few grains of dust, lifting them in a tiny swirl before they settle again. His shoulders drop a little more, sinking him into the kind of sleep that only arrives after exhaustion and the comfort of shared warmth. Beside the hearth, a woman moves in her sleep, adjusting her posture with a faint murmur. Her fingers curl into the edge of her cloak, pulling it closer around her shoulders. A lock of hair shifts gently across her cheek, catching a faint shimmer of emberlight before settling back into shadow. Her breathing remains slow, steady, anchored deeply in rest. Two travellers share a bench not far away, their heads tipped toward one another, their cloaks touching like overlapping waves. One tilts slightly, leaning just enough for their foreheads to brush. The other stirs for a moment, just a small movement like the body remembering something comforting, before settling again. Their shared warmth seems to create its own small shelter, tucked safely into the tavern's larger embrace. From beneath a nearby table comes a soft shuffle as the dog stretches his back legs. He presses his paws into the floorboards, releasing another deep, contented sigh before relaxing completely again. The faint rise and fall of his chest adds to the gentle rhythm of the room, the quiet heartbeat of a creature who knows he is safe. Above, the cat lets out a tiny chirp in its sleep, adjusting its position on the beam. It curls into a tighter coil, its tail wrapping fully around its body. The beam beneath it creaks softly as the cat settles, and then the purr resumes, a tiny steady vibration that hums faintly through the quiet. Near a central table, a half-empty bowl and wooden spoon glow faintly in the emberlight. The spoon's handle rests against the rim, casting a delicate, curved shadow. The smell of herb-filled broth still clings delicately to the air around it, though it has cooled long ago. The faint aroma mingles with the scent of warm wood, smoke and wool, forming the familiar tapestry of tavern night. A cloak hung near the door sways ever so slightly as a thin draught slips through the cracks. The fabric rustles quietly, brushing against its wooden peg with a soft, rhythmic touch that fades as quickly as it came. The cold outside remains distant, unable to penetrate through the thick stillness gathered inside. The tavern keeper's breathing deepens as they slide further into sleep. Their arms shift just a little, their fingers brushing the wooden counter. The key beside them stays motionless, but the dim glow of the embers casts a soft gleam across its metal surface, turning it into a small point of light in the otherwise shadowed bar. A faint creak echoes from the roof as the night air settles, a soft, slowly fading sound that drifts like a whisper through the beams. The tavern itself feels alive, not with activity but with rest, with the quiet stretching of old wood, the sighs of cooling walls, the faint warmth stored in the timber from the hours of firelight. Your own breath matches the tavern's rhythm, falling into the deep, slow cadence shared by every sleeper in the room. The heavy quiet wraps around your thoughts like a quilt, smoothing each one until it fades gently into the surrounding warmth. The bench beneath you feels worn and softened by years of travellers, welcoming you into the same ease that holds everyone else. The air is thick with calm. The darkness is warm, not lonely. Each breath is part of the room, sip's gentle tide. The night reaches its deepest stillness, soft, steady and safe, as the tavern holds its sleeping guests in the quiet heart of its wooden embrace, drifting slowly through the softest hours before dawn. The deepest hour of night settles like a warm fog over the tavern, so gentle and complete that even the embers seem to rest now, their last faint glow flickering in slow, sleepy breaths. The room holds itself in a perfect stillness, one shaped by tired bodies, warm shadows, and the drifting calm of dreams woven silently through the air. Nothing moves but the soft rise and fall of chests, the tiny shift of a paw or a whisker, the settling of old wood that sighs like a tired elder easing into bed. A distant rooster calls somewhere beyond the walls, soft, tentative, as if unsure whether dawn has arrived or whether it dreams too. The sound barely grazes the edges of the tavern's stillness, yet it marks something gentle and certain, the slow turning of night toward morning. The embers answer with a faint shimmer, glowing just bright enough to reveal the soft outlines of sleeping figures, bodies curled under cloaks, heads resting on arms, boots tucked beneath benches. One by one, small signs of morning stir in the room. A traveller shifts, his cloak rustling softly. The dog near the hearth stretches his legs, his paws trembling in a sleepy dream before he huffs out a warm sigh. The cat atop the beam uncurls, blinking its slow golden eyes, as though reluctantly greeting the first light creeping around the edges of the shutters. Outside, the faintest blue washes into the darkness, the first suggestion of dawn brushing the horizon. It slips quietly into the tavern through the cracks in the wooden shutters, weaving pale streaks through the dim interior, blending with the last warm glow of the embers. A new day waits beyond the door, cold, muddy and demanding, but here in this quiet pocket of the world, morning arrives gently. The tavern keeper stirs at last. Their eyes flutter open, heavy with sleep, but touched by the familiar rhythm of another day beginning. They lift their heads slowly, stretching stiff shoulders, and glance over the room with a softened gaze at the travellers, the villagers, the curled-up dog, the quiet cat, the remnants of last night's life scattered like stories asleep on the tables. There is no rush, no harsh command, just a quiet, weary smile at another peaceful night safely passed. Soon the fire will be rebuilt. Soon the stew pot will warm again. Soon voices will rise and footsteps will return and the tavern will breathe once more with its rowdy, living pulse. But not yet. For one more fragile moment, the tavern rests between night and morning, held in the calm cradle of dawn. You take one slow breath, the warmth of the room filling your lungs, carrying the scent of cooled embers and wool and safety. When you exhale, it feels like letting go of the last threads of yesterday. The quiet embraces you fully, gently, like a familiar blanket drawn up around your shoulders. And as the first true light of morning slips softly through the shutters, the medieval tavern wakes not with noise, not with chaos, but with a warm, steady heartbeat, rising once more to greet the day. Thank you for spending this night here. Sleep well, traveller. We till meet again at the next fire.